CollabTalk is a copyright of Collaborative ABA Services, making a difference in children's lives.
Hi everyone, welcome to CollabTalk, a new talk series by Collaborative ABA Services that provides information and resources about autism and everything in between. I am Alicia, the founder of Collaborative ABA Services. I am here with some of our amazing team members. Team.
I'm Brianna, I'm a BCBA.
I'm Katie, I'm an occupational therapist.
I'm Alyssa, I'm the social worker.
I'm Meg, I'm a registered behavior technician.
So today we'll be discussing what is ABA and also addressing some myths out there regarding ABA therapy. So let's get right into it. So we know that some common myths about ABA can impede process or even access to much needed services for individuals in our community. So some of the things that we hear, let's kind of delve into what ABA is as well as the myths that are common that we hear. So first of all, let's kind of talk about what is ABA.
Well, it stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis. So I think it has to deal with behaviors that, you see in an individual and trying to bring forth more of the
independence, really.
Yeah, independence. I don't want to say positive, but
and I think the biggest thing about behavior that I always tell families is it's not just behavior, it's what you see, right? So behavior is an observable, thing that we're looking at. So if you're looking for, something very specific, it can have a very specific cause and effect, but it really is looking at expanding their independence and their skills across a lot of different levels.
Yeah,
it's not just things that we would think of as behavior.
Yeah, because I think the biggest thing is, right, it doesn't have to, ABA isn't just dealing with kids that are on the spectrum, right? So ABA can be applied to kids that don't have a diagnosis of autism.
Right. It's important to note that, ABA therapy is evidence-based. So there are actual studies out there using the principles of applied behavior analysis. And I think it's also important, kind of like what you were saying, looking at the relationship and the variables between the environment as well as the behavior. And we're utilizing these principles of applied behavior analysis to really understand behavior change.
Yeah, it's a scientifically proven therapeutic approach. Like it's a thing. It's an important thing.
Right. So now that we know a little bit about what ABA is, let's talk more about what ABA isn't and what we call as some misconceptions about ABA. Let's start off with myth number one. Myth number one is saying that ABA therapy is only for children. What do you guys think about that?
Definitely a myth. It can be used for all ages. I've even heard of it being used in substance abuse programs in all different areas that behavior change is needed. So it's definitely a myth.
I think the myth comes from when people possibly think of ABA, they think of kids, and also diagnosis. You hear a lot of get them diagnosed early so that you can get services early and start right away, which is all very great, right? You want to get those interventions in early. However, it is definitely applied in adult change behavior. Even if they're, older teenagers, intervention is intervention no matter what the age is. So
and I think having it, understanding that it's based in education. So I had a BCBA talk to me once about thinking of individuals who get ABA as being learners, and so you're a lifelong learner. So depending on where you are in your life, if you need ABA support to be able to learn new things or modify what's going on, it really can be for any age.
I don't think people really realize either. It's kind of embedded in everyday life. You reinforce yourself, if I get ready fast enough, I'll make it to the drive-thru for coffee. That's reinforcement. It's just kind of part of everyday routine. You're reinforcing yourself by following through with an expectation.
Motivating yourself through whatever task.
Very true.
So myth number two, all ABA therapy is the same.
That's a myth because it is completely individualized by the child. It's tailored to what that learner needs or what the individual needs.
And it's kind of it's not a one-size-fits-all.
No.
What works for one kid is not going to work for another child, or what works for a child may not work for an adult learner. It has to be individualized. It's why you do an assessment and you create that plan, is it has to be for that individual person.
Right. I think it's important because we're meeting them where they're at, right, and using kind of their prerequisite skills to build on a scaffolding kind of technique.
Right.
Yeah, I think a big thing, Meg, you had mentioned is meeting the individual where they're at. That's a big thing, right?
Yeah.
So we're not coming in, placing interventions and saying, this is what they need to learn. We're doing an assessment. We're identifying what those things are that they're maybe lacking or need more independence in, and we're making a plan so that it is fitting the child or the adult or the learner, whoever that is.
Yeah. And what's important with that too, I think, is that, you know, families are stakeholders in it too. So it's not just what the team or the BCBA or the therapist says, like what the child needs. It's what's meaningful to the family, to the individual.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So myth number 3, ABA therapy turns children into robots. So what do we think about this one?
Well, I think it's a misconception that ABA is just sitting at a table doing discrete trial the whole time, because it can also be a very naturalistic approach. Especially I feel like with the younger kids, we always try to do more of like a play-based naturalistic approach.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the skill that you're learning. So I think if you think about kids learning, say, math facts or things, you're doing like skill drill. You're doing it more than once because you need to practice that. So some of the more academic-based things, like, you know, color identification, like language things, like those things need to be more kind of competitive and more kind of like, you know, structured. But I think if you're looking for something that's like social skills or emotional regulation or independence in daily tasks, those have to be natural, and you wouldn't practice those at a table anyway, even if you were trying to do that outside of ABA.
Yeah.
Right.
Like routines at home. We can help with routines, meal times, even like things in the community, group gatherings.
Yeah, as a social worker and doing social skills groups, we're not sitting at a table.
Right.
No, like, this is what we're doing. Okay, you talk. No, it's more natural. There may be things where we are at a table and we're discussing things, but it's not robotic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
not
definitely.
like, okay, you talk, you don't talk.
Right.
It's definitely more natural flowing.
Myth number 4, ABA therapy cures autism.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, if we had a magic cure for autism, everyone would know about it.
Yes,
so I feel like if ABA did cure autism, I mean, we would have less autism, right? So I don't think that cure is necessarily appropriate, but I do think that it's one of the top recommended or suggested therapies for children with autism. I know lots of families have gone and gotten a diagnosis, and then when they come to me, part of the diagnosis or part of the recommendations is ABA therapy, other supports, speech. So I do think that it's an incredibly valuable and helpful tool for families with children and, you know, young adults with autism, but it's not the only thing that's helpful.
Right. And I think it's important to remember that ABA is for that behavior change. So it's to maybe decrease some of those behaviors that are impacting the ability to learn other daily living skills or skills that are needed for the child to function and learn and have a beautiful life. So I think it's more, it doesn't cure, right? That diagnosis is for life, but it does make it more manageable.
More adaptive.
Right. And I think, piggybacking off of both of you, it's important that it's to notice that it's one encompass of many other things that a person can have placed into their life to help them with their diagnosis. And also, like, having the family engaged, like, that's really important. So they're not just coming to us and getting ABA and then going home and, you know, the follow through, right?
Yes.
The buy-in by the family is really, really important so that it's generalized across boards.
And that's why most places that you can get ABA from, they'll offer in-home and in clinic. So it depends on what's the best environment to teach that learner those skills. And most of the times, if we're looking at something outside of those, like, you know, academic-based things, home is the best environment, or the community is the best environment to kind of access or practice those things.
Right. So myth number 5, ABA therapy is only for people with autism.
It's used for many different populations, kind of like what we touched upon, I think, in myth number 1. But I do feel like it's associated with autism because of the number of studies that are out there, and a lot of the studies are on the autism population, but it's used across different populations.
population.
Yeah, and when we talked about myth number 1, ABA only being for kids, Bree, you had mentioned, you gave an example of substance abuse. So that is definitely something where, you know, you're changing a behavior, you're trying to learn different ways to cope and, you know, strategies to change that unpreferred behavior.
Right.
Or, you know,
I think a good classic example is like everybody makes New Year's resolutions, right?
Yeah.
So you set up this behavior change for yourself, and you know, we go to the gym 3 times that week, like
Right.
now I get
Yeah.
my special snack, things like that, you know,
Yeah.
so like you're reinforcing this behavior change, and then, you know, if you don't go to the gym 3 times, like, oh, now I don't get my special snack, which
Right.
isn't punishment,
No.
which is
Right,
important to know.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
yeah.
ABA
Right.
also is not based on punishment.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, it's all about like reinforcement and how it promotes those preferred behaviors.
preferred behaviors.
And I think a big piece of this myth, I think for a lot of families, is that a lot of insurance companies will only approve ABA therapy if it is under autism diagnosis.
Right.
Because, like Bree mentioned,
Right,
there's
right,
so
right.
much, you know, research and empirical data out there, and we all know insurance companies are looking for, you know, how to kind of get back on their investment, right?
Right,
That's
right.
why they're a company. That's
Right.
kind of how it functions. So I think that a lot of times when families look for ABA services or look for support, a lot of insurance companies say, do you have a diagnosis of autism?
Right.
So sometimes that can be a contributor to that myth, but that doesn't mean that it's the only type of diagnosis that supports it.
So the next myth number 6, is that ABA uses candy and bribes to change behavior. So I want to chime in on this one. Actually, ABA does use reinforcement to increase desired behaviors and teach skills. However, the delivery of reinforcement is based after desired behavior occurs. Whereas bribery, we're actually giving them the reinforcer before the behavior. For example, I might say to a child, hey, I'll give you a lollipop if you go and wash your hands. That's considered bribery.
Right.
Whereas if a child goes and washes their hands, I'm like, good job washing your hands. Here you go, you get a lollipop. Now that's considered reinforcement.
Yeah, and I think also something that's important is that typically food reinforcers are the last
Yes.
thing that we are going to try, right? We're going to do those assessments and see what the preferred item is, or praise. Some kids get a lot of reinforcement out of, you know, verbal praise, right?
100%,
And
yeah.
just like social praise and just saying like, awesome job, like you did it, awesome, and like that's satisfying enough. So food is like the lowest of the lowest thing that we are going to utilize, because we also don't want that to continue and then, you know, be associated with, oh, I get a lollipop every time, and then now they're having a lollipop and sugar rush or just like a lot of food and health stuff. So I think that's important.
Especially when a lot of our kids already have maybe food aversions or other, you know, selectivity. Like we don't want to really mess with any of that food stuff. So I would agree. We use food at the very last point. We really need some
Food
kind
should
of
be naturally reinforced.
exactly.
Right.
But I also think, to your point about like how it's structured, it's very specific. Like we're not just kind of giving a lollipop just because. But I also think too, like a lot of times I think about it for families is that if the child was able to change these behaviors or do these things on their own, they would. Like, we all naturally want to be successful. We want to do kind of what we're supposed to do, or, you know, kind of be getting that positive reinforcement from people around us. So if we're using food, or if we're using stickers, or, you know, a lot of these kind of concrete things, it's because that individual learner, that's what they connect and associate with how to be successful. So it's not just something that we're throwing out there. It's because we found that this is how this learner learns. This is what is motivating for them. And then it changes. Like sometimes kids start with something more concrete, and then once they get into the routine, then things can, you know, decrease, because we're looking for how can we find a reinforcer that is the least intrusive and most natural. That's going to make the most sense.
You're gonna fade it eventually. It's not gonna like he needs an M&M every time he washes his hands.
I mean, I do, but here we go.
And being cognizant that like preferences change. That's why we do the preference assessment.
Exactly.
Right. All right. So myth number 7. Anyone can do ABA therapy without training.
Training is definitely required. Let's see, like there's tons of different professionals. There's BCBAs, BCABAs, and then there's RBTs. and even BTs that have some more informal training, they're still overseen by a BCBA who has very intensive training and certifications. So
that is true. And we also have to go through licensure as well. And then also it's important that the BACB, they actually regulate a lot of our certifications in the ABA field, and they, you know, regulate like who gets access to them. We have to go through specific educational training. We have to take some testing. And also, when you're looking at ABA and the principles of ABA, it does require specialized training, because if someone is not really trained and they're implementing strategies, that can cause more harm than good.
Yes.
And that's the reason why, like with ABA therapy, we have the parent training parts, right, of our ABA therapy to train parents, and that's why there is a BCBA to oversee the behavior technician, so that they're also training the behavior technician on the implementation of programs, so to make sure that everyone is on the same page, so we're not causing harm. So that's very important.
Also, not being ineffective. I feel like it may not be like a negative or positive thing, but if you're doing something that's not really helping the learner, or it's not really helping the family understand it, then it's kind of like, well, why are we doing this? And that's kind of the opposite of what ABA is. ABA is really, how can we be the most effective with the time and resources that we have, which is why it can be so successful.
Right.
Yeah, it's important cross disciplines too, like working with the multidisciplinary teams, not only just at home but at school with the, you know, the SLP, OT, PT, other therapists, providers. So like you said, everybody's on the same page, everybody's following through with the same kind of like programming and creating the most success.
Yeah, the follow through is major.
Huge.
Major.
Right.
And consistency.
Yes, absolutely.
Same with everything, really.
So myth number 8, ABA is harmful. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying, like the specific training is required, and how we're oversight, you know, by the BACB as well as our state licensing board. And we also have like ethics that are embedded in our roles, in our licensure and certifications, which means that we have to act in the best interest of our learners or families that we work with.
And it gives a guideline for all of us to practice by, so it is always in a beneficial way to the clients.
And I think also too, having the understanding that ABA is not beneficial for everybody, but there are learners and individuals that can benefit from it. So if you have a child that is not the best approach and they're using it, it's going to kind of have that friction. It's going to rub against what that individual needs. But if it's a, you know, really well organized program and it's the best fit for the family, and it's the best fit for the child, then it really does work and it is really successful.
Well, like you were saying earlier, there's years and years of research. You know, over the last 50 years, ABA has evolved drastically. And there are 100%. Some, you know, stigmatizing things and studies that were done back in the day, that videos they're shown now in school, like, absolutely, this is no longer ethical. Things have changed and improved drastically over the last 50, 60 years. And I think the stigma around like institutionalization still exists too for some generations, and we're moving past.
So team, we mentioned some myths, but are there any other myths that we might have forgotten today that, you know, you guys might hear in regards to ABA?
I think from like the OT side of things, kind of not being an ABA professional, I think one of the things that I hear a lot is that ABA is only for behaviors. So, and when we think of behaviors, we think of like those aggressive or self-injurious things, and things that, you know, sometimes children on the spectrum can present with. And ABA is a fabulous support or approach for those things, but it's not the only thing that ABA does. So I think that understanding that ABA can help with independence, with skills, with learning, like it's not just keeping a child safe, it's helping the child be independent as well.
I think not so much of a myth, but a concern for some families when considering home therapy, that'll kind of hinder that like home routine, or like parents thinking like, I can't get anything done if ABA is going on at home, which in a way is a myth, I believe, because we come in to help with those daily routines, to make things more cohesive, to make things smoother, or try to create like more like those boundaries, routines, too. So all stakeholders again are involved and kind of reinforced by it too.
And where maybe it might hinder your comfortability during that time that the that the practitioners are in there, I think it's important to know that they or we try to blend in as much as possible to make it as natural for that child or a client as much as possible. So it's really, again, that naturalistic approach.
I think another concern that I maybe hear with parents is with ABA coming in home and working, I'm going to be judged for how I parent.
Yeah.
Right? So I
Yeah.
think that's a big thing that
That's
holds
true.
parents and families back from receiving that in-home care. And we're not judging.
No.
We are
No.
not judging
No.
at all. We're trying to help on both ends, help you understand, help your child learn, be independent. Whatever we can do to aid in, that child, adult, whoever, the learners, independence and learning, that's, what we're there for.
Yeah, because I feel like you wouldn't go into this profession if you didn't care. Like
Right.
you didn't have a general compassion. I mean, I've been doing this for a while, but I feel like no matter what place I work at or kind of like the individuals I work with, anybody who's in the ABA community, they genuinely care. They're compassionate, warm, caring people because they want to help children and they want to help families. And so, like you mentioned, like going through that process can be a little scary, uncomfortable, but we are here to help. Like we want to help families, we want to help your child or your individual, like we're just here.
And some providers are parents too, like
Yeah,
myself.
100%,
We get it.
yep.
We've all been there.
We're not judging.
Even on the worst days.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think another important piece to consider too when we're talking about the myths of ABA is sometimes people are like, oh, it's going to disrupt my life. I have to do 40 hours a week. How am I going to do that? And again, each case is different.
Yes.
Each learner is different. What might work for one child might not work for another child, kind of like what you were saying, Katie. Some child might actually make progress with like as little as 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
They might not necessarily need like the whole 40 hours a week, and I think that that's also something important to consider in regards to when we're looking at ABA therapy and some of the myths around it.
And some providers will pay for community settings, like providers going to daycare, so you don't have to work shorter hours. Your children can still go to daycare without the fear of having that support there for camps, things like that.
Thank you, team, for your valuable insight today about what ABA is and also the myths about ABA. And thanks for tuning in to this episode, everyone, of CollabTalk. So if you found this information valuable, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and also hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Got thoughts or questions? Drop them in our comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep this conversation going. To learn more about collaborative ABA services, check us out on our website at www.collaborateabaservices.com and our additional social media pages, including Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and
TikTok.
Okay, TikTok. Thank you.
CollabTalk is a copyright of Collaborative ABA Services, making a difference in children's lives.